2020 is just the worst year of my life and that of my sister, because it's a year I will never forget, a year that we gone through hell.
Welcome everyone to this panel, to this webinar. Welcome to the WCC webinar talking about sexual and gender-based violence in conflict zones. We have heard and we have experienced a very difficult year. 2020 has been an year of tragedy, very challenging year. For many, it has been an additional burden on the top of conflicts already experienced in daily life. We will hear from those who have life experiences in these multiple challenges, sometimes very personal, sometimes very painful. We are listening in a solidarity, in a community experience. We are listening to these situations for those people who don't have access to sometimes to good internet. We need to listen them via video. And this will be our first moment. We are watching some videos. We will hear from 3 experiences. We will hear from Reverend Emmanuel from Cameroon. We will hear from South Sudan Council of Churches, Angeline and Margaret. We will have some interpretation because they are speaking in their own language. And we are hearing from Tallinn, from the Armenian Evangelical Social Action Committee. Those 3 experiences are going to give us a background, life experience about being and suffering painful experiences during conflict zone. Let's go for the videos.
I would describe my context as really unfortunate. I will use the word unfortunate because context now that is shrouded with a crisis within another crisis, because we, first of all, had been suffering under the Anglophone crisis for about 4 years now, or let's say for 3 years, until another crisis stepped in and has compounded the whole issue of the Anglophone crisis to take a different dimension. It's no longer the political or social economic crisis in the country. It's now battling with the internal crisis and the pandemic. And so it's like a double portion of a problem. Yes, I think that's the best way I can describe double situation of crisis. And so we consider ourselves really, really unfortunate for now. The internally displaced people in the bushes are sometimes usually afraid to come to town for the hospitals for fear of being termed terrorists or being shot on spot or at distance. These things have made it very difficult even for the health outlet or for health groups to meet the people. Even if we do a lot of campaign about the necessity to do tests and vaccinations against the COVID-19, the people won't come because they are afraid that on their way coming, they may be shot on the spot. And by this, one of the serious issues are the policies of the hospitals. Since the hospitals made a mistake of trying to create a list of COVID-19 patients indiscriminately without doing the proper tests, and it scared people away from the hospitals now tend to lose its patients and thereby losing income. Now, what have they resorted to doing? They have resorted now to increasing all medical bills on drugs and little medical facilities for every other patient who comes to the hospital. Now, this makes more of the patients and the people around the town to run away completely from hospitals. And in running away from the hospitals, they are now trying to apply local and traditional means of healing themselves, just in case they found themselves ill with common sicknesses around. And so these are particular challenges that are really disturbing us. And we are hoping to see that maybe the government can rethink of its policy.
in the middle of the conflict that we are in, COVID-19 has added a lot of challenges. One of them is the economic challenges because of the lockdown. People are not able now to go and get their daily bread because some of the people in South Sudan rely on daily base work. So there are a lot of challenges that COVID has had. One of them is economic.
يعني هو التغيير بتاع الفكرة ذاته.
Yeah, it has changed even the mindset of people.
ثاني تغيير بتاع نشاط حتى في الكنيسة، نشاطات غير.
It has closed many activities even in the church.
يعني تغيير ذهني، تغيير فكري، تغيير اقتصادي، تغيير اجتماعي.
It has affected the social, economic, political status in the country.
غير حتى وضع بتاعنا في الاجتماعي، في القواعد، في التعامل.
Even it has affected our normal way of interacting socially.
حتى العلاقات.
Even relationships.
لأن الناس بقى ما بيكون قريب مع بعض.
People are not closer to one another.
Because of عشان COVID-19.
Because of COVID-19. Yeah, the conflict has affected women badly, in the sense that families are scattered, children, many of them are in the IDP camps, they lack education, and also the COVID-19 added to that. Schools are closed down, now children are unable to go to schools. So both issues or both problems affected mostly women and children. The second thing is that the lockdown in the country because of COVID-19 has affected mostly students because all the schools were closed. Students have become redundant staying at home, and it has created another thing that sexual gender-based violence is being practiced within the family. Many young girls are pregnant because they stay at home, they don't go anywhere. And in the same family, you know, the issues of rape and issues of sexual gender-based violence have raised up.
They affected the business in the country, and especially in conflict zones, we had closure of business. So one situation was acting on the other like a cycle, and it created many other problems and difficulties. For example, in conflict zones, we had many people that had the rent problems because their houses were like rent. They didn't have private houses. So this made also this unemployment, and the pandemic made the situation more difficult for them to provide for their families, to let's say pay the rent of the house, and the owner was all the time trying to, let's say, fix the situation. And on the other hand, people in this area, let's say, particularly needed some care because they were living alone. So many people couldn't reach them because of the pandemic, and this made hard situation for them and their medical, let's say, situation, because they needed medication, they needed care, they needed food. They were always dependable on people and the surrounding, especially speaking of Middle East. People, like, they were close to each other and always trying, relatives and families, to help each other. And it was really shocking when the pandemic started that these things were forbidden and avoided. So this was again creating a challenge. Then economic crisis and the escalating of the prices also in the nearby, let's say, regions in Lebanon, let's say, as a country, was also making things more tense and sometimes creating a suffocating atmosphere.
Conflict is traumatizing for everyone. The COVID pandemic has just added to this conflict time another burden, much more on their daily life. We have heard some of this common burden, how being alone, needing medical care, needing food, having huge economic challenges, or the need to be in lockdown in their house, and the challenge of the cultural challenge of being alone and not interacting with people, how this affected relationship, and how this affected children, especially in living through sexual and gender-based violence inside the families. So we need to receive all these testimonies and experiences, not only with our head, with our understanding, but also to bring them close to our heart and to think what are the implications for our faith, for our congregation, living in community. So we continue this webinar, this discussion now, listening and watching to another video. We will hear from young people, now from northern Nigeria. We will hear how they have experienced being kidnapped, and hear a little bit more from Damaris, the one that we started our webinar at the beginning. And she was kidnapped with her sister for 18 days. It is important to note that some are additionally affected, especially those people, persons with disabilities. Jonathan in Nigeria shared his traumatic story of being kidnapped also. And he and his family forced to walk for 2 days through river and bushes. So they managed to escape, but had to leave someone behind. Let's hear to their voices, to their stories, and let's be in compassion with their stories and their experience.
It's just something that I just don't wish to remember. Every time the gunshot, they even select 2 of my sisters that they are going to kill. They select me that they are going to kill me. So they call my dad that they are going to kill me because my dad could not, he was unable to give them the money because he was not having the money to give them. We don't know what we did, but we are humiliated. We are just a common people in Nigeria managing life, managing ourselves, but these people just came and humiliated me and my sisters for no reason. We don't know what we did. And asking our dad to bring money. Our dad had to sell everything that we have. And we are just renting. We are just a rent that we could not even pay, because before they kidnapped us, the landlord was on our neck for us to pay the house rent. So they asked my dad had to sell everything. And even when we came back, we realized that my mom was collapsed. She collapsed. My dad had an heart failure because of this. And they still asked for money. So my dad just have to start begging around the street, sell everything just to provide the money.
At long last, one fateful day, on the 13th day after they were being kept with the kidnappers, they left to the market and left one of their persons with them to guide them. In the morning around 9 o'clock, he started sleeping. When he started sleeping, they now had a chance to run away, but one person could not run. He was unable to walk. So at long last, when they arrived home, the Fulani called again. They said, oh, they think they were wise that they ran away. One person is still in their custody. Now, are they ready to bring the money, the ransom, or they will kill him? So they pleaded with them. They pleaded. After much pleading, they said, okay, they should bring 3 million, which they pleaded and pleaded and pleaded. At long last, they paid about almost 2 million.
Now, we are going to a second moment in this webinar. Now we are going to listen to 4 panelists. We have asked some questions to the panelists, and they are going to answer these questions with the experiences that we have listened and watched in the videos. We are now going to hear from Natalia Vasilevich she is an Orthodox theologian from Minsk and currently working on her dissertation at the University of Bonn. She is also director of the Center Ecumena in Minsk, Belarus. A second speaker will be Reverend Giantico Ijansini Yamare, who is part of the ACT Alliance Youth Community of Practice, co-chair of this community, and representing Africa region. He is from Nigeria. We have already listened to him in the video. We have also Reverend Emmanuel Bayi, who is the program officers from men's work in the Presbyterian Church in Cameroon. And lastly, but not least, we have Miss Lisette Duran, who is working with the World Christian Student Federation, and Dipas from Colombia. Just to alert, Lisette will speak in Spanish, and for those who need, you can then access the channel, the interpretation channel. We start with Natalia. Natalia, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. I would like to share experiences from Belarus, and COVID-19 has influenced very much to the appearance of the conflict in Belarus in August of this year, because in my country, the government was ignoring the problem of COVID, and so it was given false information about the disease and not providing enough medical help and hiding the numbers, and so the society became very politicized because of this, and had a lot of protests against the government. And at the elections which we had in August, people tried to elect a new president, and since that moment the big conflict started. During this conflict, 20,000 people already since August were arrested and detained, and it's also a very big problem for us. People were severely beaten, tortured in prisons. Even now the government started to build a new prison because it's not enough space to keep people in the prison, and now last months the rates of COVID disease became very high, also because in the prisons where people are kept, they are moved from cell to cell, they are moved from prison to prison, and so everyone who gets now into prison, who is arrested, automatically gets COVID, because it's an pandemic inside the prisons, and the government didn't provide medical help for people who are kept in prisons. And that makes rates of those who have this disease to be very high, and also many young people die from COVID. From my surroundings, from my circles, I know several people who are 33, 36 years old who died from COVID because they were not provided with medical help, and it's a situation which is very awful, and mainly we call our revolution as a female revolution, because it's a lot of women who participate in peace protests, and but they're not beaten as severely as male people are beaten, but they have additional pressure in this conflict, because their husbands, their sons, their brothers are beaten, and they need to also to take care of them, of their wounds. after they are released. And also very many medical doctors are protesting, and they're also beaten and arrested. And so that also make the situation with COVID-19 very dangerous, because many doctors are actually in prison. There is not enough doctors in hospitals to provide medical help, and now they opened COVID points for example, in prenatal hospitals, and gynecologists are treating COVID, not infectionists, and that make all the situation very dangerous. I don't know. It's something that you cannot control, because this disease is very dangerous, even if you take measures. And if you do not take measures, it can become more and more difficult. And I also want to share one story of one woman. Her son, Timur, Orthodox guy, 16 years old, was very, very severely beaten on the 10th of August. He was tortured, and this woman, she's mother of 9. And 7 of them are pre-18 years old. And she was 45 years old. In September, she died because she was so much traumatized by the experience her son went through during tortures. Her health became very bad, and she died, leaving alone 9 children, 7 of them in a premature age. And that's just an example. Like, it's not always violence which is directed directly to women, for example, but women, they go through also by being witnesses of violence. It's trauma for all the society, and also it's trauma for everyone, because everyone can experience both being beaten and also being not given the medical help.
Thank you, Natalia, for sharing your experience, for sharing the stories that are coming from your experience, from your life. We are motivating people who are listening, the audience who are listening to us, watching, following us in the YouTube channel. You can use the chat to interact and to ask questions. There will be also moments of follow-up and interaction with the panelists later on this channel. Another important question is to listen how churches are able to respond to these situations. What is our role as faith-based actors and leaders? So we are going to listen from Reverend Jantiku from Nigeria, who will give us an overview of what is possible to do from a church perspective, from a young youth perspective. Reverend Jantiku.
The church has not been silent over the issues and the happenings in the globe today, knowing fully well that 2020 has indeed been a very challenging year with the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic. But the church, especially in Nigeria, has been responding in the following ways. One, the church has been advocating on the danger of the virus and how people can help prevent the spread of the virus. And the church also has engaged government to provide relief materials and to see how people that are affected by the virus can be helped. And those who cannot access medical facilities, how it can get to their doorstep so that they can be tested, and if they are positive, how they can be isolated, and how possible treatments can be given to them to recover from the pandemic. So the church has helped in advocacy and to see how these people can be helped. And also the church has, in its own way, provided relief materials. Because of the lockdown, it became very difficult to survive. To access funds and even to get food to eat became so difficult, especially in my country. So churches have tried in a number of ways to ensure that they get relief materials to these people, to provide them food items, to provide relief materials, and to help promote the hygiene to reduce the spread of the virus. And also the church has tried in building trauma healing centers, especially for people who had been kidnapped. From the story we had, there's a trauma healing center where those who are psychologically affected by the kidnap and by the experiences they had in the hands of the kidnappers are taken care of and are helped psychologically so that they can come out of the trauma and so that they can fulfill their purpose. Thank you.
Thank you, Gentico, for giving us a perspective coming from Nigeria, from the Nigeria church's work, diaconal practices and work. We are going now to Cameroon. Cameroon with Reverend Emmanuel Voyer. Can you tell us what is all these experiences? How does it sound to you, and how does it come back to you as a pastor? And what are the big challenges coming from your experience? Reverend Emmanuel, are you there?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, please. If you understood what I was trying to say at the former video or that was played, you will see that our situation in Cameroon here, it's a little bit of what I can describe as doubly compounded. Doubly compounded in the sense that in 2016, we were facing a major problem, which was the Anglophone crisis. And then somewhere into the crisis, the pandemic came in, thereby making us in Cameroon here to begin to think that we do not really know where to. Is it the crisis that is going to destroy this economy, or is it the pandemic that has come to destroy the economy? In our local context here, we often say it is very difficult to face a war in two fronts. And within Cameroon now, that is the kind of battle we're going through, where we see government resources is being split into either handling the crisis or trying to handle the pandemic, where we see even the humanitarian needs in the country now has to be divided. There are people who have been suffering as a result of numerous lockdowns as caused by the COVID-19. There are more and more deaths that are being increased from the pandemic. The number of deaths double every day. If you are not going to die by the bullet. But before we even came to accept the pandemic, the whole problem was the general problem of the denier. In the context of Cameroon and our culture, there was this notion that the black body cannot contract the virus. And you see, with this kind of impression, people didn't take serious all the precautions that were prescribed by the World Health Organization. And before we knew it, it wasn't just the crisis killing people now, but numerous people were dying on the of kidnaps under the Anglophone crisis. Many people were kept in camps. Women were left in the bushes who have been so dirty that the spread of the virus became very increasing. I'm back again to our society as a pastor in the church. I had to face situations of say maybe parents who have died and left their young daughters to take care of the family. And you see with that, they have to go into maybe prostitution in order to see whether they can survive the family. So you see the general perspective of Cameroon in this conflict time is that in Cameroon now, we do not know what is going to kill us. And sometimes we are faced with the situation of confusingly choosing whether to die in the crisis or to die by COVID. But the whole idea of death is so rampant in our mind. I fear and uncertainty. I think that's just a summary I can give about the situation in Cameroon now, which has come to, what I can say, mix up. Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Emmanuel. Thank you for raising awareness about the situation in Cameroon and the intersection between the conflict and the pandemic, and how this is affecting different groups of people, how this is affecting children. We have listened how this is affecting families, as Natalia was telling us, how this situation is affecting the congregation in itself, the relationship of the congregations, women, how this is affecting women in general. We have now another participation coming from Colombia. As I said, Lisette Duran will speak in Spanish. So those who can understand Spanish, stay in the channel, or those who need English interpretation, please choose the English channel.
Muchas gracias. Bueno, considero que la pandemia nos ha dejado muy claro en Colombia que tiene la capacidad de devastar estados.
Thank you very much. I think the pandemic has made it clear that it's a virus that does not always only wreak havoc on health, but also in our society. The consequences of the pandemic are serious, especially for those in the midst of an armed conflict. In Colombia, this disease became a fog, a black fog that impeded decision-making to favor power structures,
Seguridad, mientras incrementaban las
and it
violencias,
hindered the delivery of security measures. At the same time, we continued seeing the killings of Afro-descendants, indigenous peoples, women, human rights defenders, and those who were in favor of the peace accord. This had been happening for a very long time before the pandemic, but it was exacerbated by the pandemic, especially during the lockdown. We saw increasing amounts of threats, violence against women, violence against girls, and a general speech of denial of our government before the situation of human rights, deterioration and lack of safe spaces for leadership. Currently, Colombia has been affected by a hurricane, which made the situation even worse because of the increase of COVID cases and the situation that some cities are facing because of the hurricane. In this year, 2020, in Colombia, we have seen 77 massacres. It amounts to 309 persons, 250 leaders, human rights defenders have been killed this year. In terms of feminicide, we have 105 cases of feminicide so far. And women are working in very precarious conditions. The unemployment rates keep growing, especially amongst women. Children, girls and boys have suffered greatly from this pandemic by being locked in their homes. And this has increased domestic violence rates. Children are exposed to child abuse, sexual abuse, and school dropouts have increased as well. We know that education is one of the ways in which we can fight against poverty. But the lack of online systems, the lack of access to internet has made it even worse and has increased this gap. So we've seen that there's a disproportionate distribution of domestic tasks. Women have had to stay at home, working over 7 hours a day on non-remunerated tasks at home. This has had a great impact on families, but especially in women who suffered the most. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisette. Thank you for giving us this, this overview of the Colombian situation, where the pandemic has just exacerbated crises that have been experienced in Colombia, especially with the conflict. And you have told us about the violation of human rights, which is now denied, using the pandemic as an excuse. you have told us on the top of having the pandemic, on the top of having the crisis, you have also faced now a climate situations like the hurricane, and and this all is giving a very challenging situation for all of you in Colombia, with leaders, communitarian leaders being murdered, with children being out of the school and not having access to virtual platforms, which is then increasing their vulnerability. Women have been also losing their jobs and their economic power and the economic role. So we have heard so many of those common threads in these many testimonies from the panel. We have heard from the videos also so many common threads that this pandemic, the virus, has exacerbated existing situations, and it has worsened the situation, the crisis for women, for children especially. We have heard also that the crisis, the pandemic and the violent conflicts going on in the regions is just affecting women and children in a very, very heavy way. And those are the more vulnerable, the more affected. We have also heard voices of hope, voices of experiences of hope coming especially from the churches that are providing trauma healing, churches providing access to medical resources, to medicines, churches providing a place where people can come and be safe. I'm thanking all of you from the panel, that you gave us a very hard, a very difficult overview of your situation, but it touches us as listening you, not only in our understanding, it moves us in our hearts. It comes to our heart, and it will provoke a change in our faith perspective. It must provoke a change in our faith perspective. I'm thanking you all, the panelists, now in this discussion, and I would like to invite now to have a word of a comment on this global overview that we have heard, we have seen and watched through the videos, and to the life of the panelists. We would like to hear now from our director of the Commission of the Churches in International Affairs from WCC, Peter Proof. Peter, give us some perspectives. How can we, the ecumenical movement, how can we in the churches address, what can we do with all what we have heard so far? Peter, please come in.
Thank you very much, Eliane. I want to thank all the speakers, all those who've contributed and shared their realities from Cameroon, from South Sudan, Lebanon, Nigeria, Belarus, Colombia, and I would also like to add for our reflection the situations in Nagorno-Karabakh, and right now, these very hours in Ethiopia, where similar very acute situations are occurring. I think what these contributions have helped illustrate for us and make real for us is indeed what has been referred to the compounding effect of the pandemic, the way in which conflict compounds the pandemic by creating instability and displacement and disruption that in turn results in increased exposure to infection and reduced access to testing and to medical care. But the pandemic also compounds conflict situations and situations of violence by resulting in reduced visibility of or reduced attention to those situations, and especially to the impacts on ordinary people. And as you have just said, Eleni, I mean, what we particularly take away from this discussion is the way in which the pandemic exacerbates pre-existing vulnerabilities and inequalities related to gender, related to disability, related to poverty. And I think especially, again, as you have alluded to, the particular consequence in terms of sexual and gender-based violence, which, as we know, is always a tragic consequence of conflict situations, but during the pandemic has itself become a shadow pandemic. So that double impact and that double impulse for increased rates of sexual and gender-based violence is particularly concerning. I think what we have to do as churches and as an ecumenical and ethical community in this context is to really lift up the greatly increased moral responsibility of parties to any conflict to stop fighting each other and to join together with all of us in fighting the virus, which is an enemy that is utterly implacable and cannot be negotiated with. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter. This is a word of commitment. This is a call for our commitment, a moral imperative, an ethical attitude of what are we doing with what we listen and what we see? What is our responsibility? What is our faith responsibility with all of this, what we have seen and listened? I would call now each one of the panelists again and to ask them that they can say one word of hope and one word of commitment. One word of hope and one word of commitment in 1 minute each one. And we start with Natalia. Natalia, what would be your word of hope and commitment for all of us that we have listened to all of these experiences that we have heard during this webinar?
Yeah, I was really feeling pain together with listening to the stories through and listening to what people are going through. And I think that solidarity is very important word in this case. And solidarity is something we can share our pains, and we can try to share also our experience and good experiences, how we have overcome, how good practices of communities and churches which help in overcoming the situation of violence, the situation of pandemic, and the situation of conflicts, and that's what I have hope to, and that it will not only finish with sharing stories, but it will have continuation in changing the situations.
Thank you, Natalia. Giantico, what would be your word of hope and commitment for all of us?
We must see each other as created by God and created equal. And we must strive against gender inequality and gender-based violence of whatever forms. We're all created by God, and we must see each other in that regards. And we must continue to trust God to help us overcome this pandemic, just like others in history. And we must continue to pray and depend totally on God, because He alone can bring us out of this pandemic. So we must put God first in everything we do.
Amen, Giantico. Reverend Emmanuel, give us a word of hope and commitment from Cameroon.
Cameroon, you see, after we kidnapping of teachers and the kidnapping of a cardinal, a Catholic cardinal, and the killing of for the first time, the church now had to commit itself into trying to see that they can begin to speak. At first, it seemed the church was a bit muted, but advocacy has been our watchword this day, and the church is powerfully talking and trying to negotiate the situation with the government, and also to educate the society on on the evil that is being released on the people. So I think our hope for now is the fact that the church is fully engaged, is trying to see that a lasting solution is brought to this. Thank you.
Thank you, Emmanuel. And Lisette, ¿qué palabras de esperanza, de comprometimiento tú podrías dar a todos nosotros?
What are your words of hope that you can give us all?
Considero que empatía, esta pandemia ha sacado muchas
I think
cosas.
this pandemic has taught us several lessons, but it has also given us some hope and some awareness on the need to protect one another, and has given us the chance to reflect on the role of faith-based organizations and how we should keep working together as a church, united in all places of the world, to raise our voices and be a prophetic, united voice that denounces and announces its message in the face of violence and injustice. Our faith should continue to grow to help those who need it the most. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Peter, would you have a word of hope and commitment to all of us?
The word of hope comes from perhaps the worst side of this pandemic, the way in which, as I said, it exacerbates and throws into even sharper relief all the underlying vulnerabilities and inequalities that have always been there, but which are now made even more visible. We cannot say that we can't or we haven't seen these inequalities and vulnerabilities. We no longer have that excuse. And so the word of hope lies in the fact that we see the consequence of those vulnerabilities and inequalities. And we must now take up that challenge of addressing them.
There is a biblical experience of when God sees the suffering of the people, God will come and save and intervene for the suffering of the people. Seeing makes us committed. Seeing the situation needs to move us towards a second level of action. And this is the great call, I think, that we have listened from all the videos that we have seen, the videos that we have watched, the voices that we have heard. Natalia said that her hope was not that we just listen to the stories, but we are committed with the stories. Peter is phrasing this, saying, when we see the situation, we cannot look away and say that we don't have anything to do with this. For all what we have heard today, all the voices, all these experiences, we cannot just come out of this webinar, out of the situation that we are experiencing during this whole year as being the same. We don't want to be in a normal situation because the situation was never normal. We have now experienced that the situation was always in a difficult, in provoking vulnerability for some groups, especially women, children. And those words of hope that we have heard, the solidarity, the hope for change, the committed faith that we have been created equal in God's image, that we can trust and pray that God will intervene, that the church now is fully committed to interact in society, that we have now empathy, and that we can have and experience every day more care, to look to each other, to call each other, to remember that we are not just living alone in our churches, in our communities, in our homes, but we are connected with South Sudan, with Cameroon, with Colombia, with Minsk, with Belarus, with Nigeria, with so many other places and experiences where we see that the conflict the conflict in daily life is just it's just becoming worse with the pandemic, that we can express our solidarity, our community in being together. May the God of life, the God of solidarity, who sees the suffering of the people, may the God, wisdom God, be with us, embrace us, and guide us in our movements, in our walking, in our daily walking, where we together we can work for change, for transformation of those injustices for all, and bringing life to all. We would like to finish this webinar thanking all of you, thanking all the panelists, thanking all those who have been telling the stories, thanking all those who have been behind the scenes, Marcelo, Denise, the interpreters who have been behind, Sarah, who have been in the structure of this webinar. Thank you so much for your work, and a special word of thanks to Reverend Nicole Ashwood, who has been working hard, pushing all of us together and giving us so much inspiration, not only during this webinar, but in her whole work in World Council of Churches, leading the community of women and men. Thank you so much, Nikki. Your leadership is very much appreciated, and we are very much honored to work together with you. And thank you so much for WCC, for the World Council of Churches, for bringing such a powerful and moving and touching voices to be listened to into the global virtual space. We are going to finalize now this webinar listening to two voices of hope. We are going to listen to the voices of hope coming from two videos again. Thank you so much for everyone.
I would love to do the work of God, and if I'm capable, I would love to help the poor who are in the situation that we went through, who cannot help themselves. If I am opportune and having the means to do that, I would love to.
Thinking about hope, I was like, hope, this word of hope in this situation and in this chaotic situation, let's say, I was reminded of the word kairos, which means that we have to move and we have to act in this time, in this place. And I was reminded of making this crisis a time of favor and a time of grace, because we had to like put our faith into action. We are like church members, and our families are from different churches. So hearing about God's word, it was now time to act and use this word to overcome this situation. And I was reminded of the Queen Esther in the Bible. She fasted and she prayed, and then she acted. So this is what we had to do as people belonging to churches, as committed members. We had to act and be proactive and bold, having faith and moving forward as much as we can with this torch of light in our hands.